All right, welcome folks. We're going to start this conversation in about 1 minute. So get your drinks or coffee cups ready and your thinking caps on. We're going to have a little bit of a deep dive conversation about housing. Thank you, Randall. I appreciate it. I'm excited. Okay, it is 8:31, folks, and you know what that means. It is coffee chat time with Economic Alliance Snohomish County. I'm Gary Clark, President and CEO of Economic Alliance Snohomish County, and I welcome you all with your drinks or coffee, whatever you like to have. Now, moving on, we do have a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As you all know, if you're regulars, we'd love for you to provide and add your organization to your name in the chat. So when you make a comment or question, we know who you're with. And then also, we love when you're engaged. So engage us, enjoy the conversation. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions because we have some very good experts on the panel today. So without further ado, I have the distinct pleasure of starting this coffee chat off right. And so I would like to welcome Chris Collier, who is the program manager for Alliance for Housing Affordability, a shared resource of housing information for Snohomish County cities. Since starting in 2016, Chris has worked to explain the fundamentals around housing affordability to support impactful steps to address the issue. So Chris is going to start us off with a great conversation. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. That's you're setting me up for a lot here. It's going to be a great conversation. It's a little grim, the data foundation that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to take just 5 minutes to kind of lay the groundwork for the conversations from Dwayne and Mayor Smith and Mayor Franklin to follow. So I'm going to jump right into it and share my screen. Here we go. And it's going to be a bit of a data dump to get your morning started, but I've tried to make it easily accessible. So in one slide, I'm going to try and explain to you the regional context of housing. And really, it starts with our supply of housing relative to new households. That is this green bar added up year over year. 1,100 more housing units created than new households were established in Snohomish County in the year 2003. Now, any units that don't go sold or rented in 2003 are demoed in 2004. So this number adds up over time. 6,422 units of housing in 2003 if you start counting in the year 2000. Now, you'll notice that something happens by 2020. We're functionally out of housing. We have such a massive inversion of new households versus relative to new housing construction that we're out. And if you know supply and demand, you know that means the price of housing is going to rise. And that's reflected in this brown line, the median sale price adjusted for inflation of housing of a single family home in Snohomish County has risen, again, adjusted for inflation by over $200,000 in the last 20 years. Now, the sale price doesn't really reflect your ability to access housing. It's your real income to get financing for a bank loan for most normal families. And so the required income given typical loan terms is this yellow line. $121,000 is the required income given typical loan terms in the fine print on the bottom to obtain housing. By the way, an administrative law judge makes between $100,000 and $130,000 in the first half of their career. So law judges or administrative law judges are now at the front lines of affordability in housing in Snohomish County. And that's for the 3-county region, by the way. King, Snohomish, and Pierce, the income. So the question then is, what do we really make as households? The median household income is not enough. This is the median household income for Snohomish County, again, all adjusted for inflation. And you see that in 2000, 87 and 86,000 respectively, and the degree to which these two lines diverge is where housing unaffordability begins. It rolls down to townhomes and condominiums and rentals. Just for comparison, I've put the average rent for all unit types, studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s in all of Snohomish County here, so you can see the proportionality of rents taking off in 2014 relative to real income progression. So this is your workers and people that you know that are in this graph right here. So why is this all happening? The national perspective. These states that are orange are states that people are on net leaving. They're leaving California, the Rust Belt, and going to Florida, Texas, and Washington State in that order. In 2012, Washington receives 11,000 new residents. In 2016, that number jumped to 53,000 people. And this is a five-fold increase in just 4 years. And I have no evidence to show that it's slowed down since 2016. And a majority of these people were less than 35 years old, seeking economic opportunity in the Pacific Northwest at the beginning of their income progression. Now, one thing that I often hear about is, well, Chris, you mentioned the judge example, but that's just a single income. So let's combine incomes with the understanding that 25 to 34-year-olds living with a spouse in that age group has declined by half since 1968, and it's not explained by living with an unattached partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, roommate, whatever. But nevertheless, we'll have that combined income discussion. Here is the required income for all Alliance jurisdictions, plus a few extras across the bottom for a townhome, condo, single family home, anything. I'll buy anything, just what's the average? This is the median required income and a selection of occupations that you see, starting at police and sheriffs. For the 3-county region, this is the median income for police and sheriff's officers and down to baristas in Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties, all rolled into one. And because the industrial trades are very important, a selection of those too. And so let's combine incomes. Marriage and family therapist and floral designer, combined income of $85,000 are only able to afford the median house in the city of Darrington. That's it with your combined income. Okay, how about security guard and sheet metal worker? I'm just kind of throwing them together. You can too. $97,000. Can only afford it, Darrington and a few other places. So combined incomes can be a solution, but it's not the solution for a growing number of employees and workers in the Puget Sound region, I should say. So in conclusion, before I turn it over to the next speaker, Western Washington has a severe supply imbalance. There are a growing number of people who cannot afford rent, even with good paying jobs. And everyone, including you, every single one of you on this call, even if I haven't met you yet, you have a valid voice in housing, both as in the business community and as a resident, and you need to use it. Everyone has a valid voice in this discussion. And while this issue goes unaddressed, the need for other options increases, which introduces or segues into our next speaker, Dwayne Leonard, the Executive Director of HASCO. Take it away, Dwayne.
Well, thank you, Chris. I would like to provide a little bit of local historical perspective here. The slide I have in front of you is the infamous billboard that was put up on Pacific Highway South down in Seattle in 1971. The last one leaving Seattle, please turn out the light. This was during a time period of severe economic hardship. Boeing had just gone through a reduction in force and laid off 80% of their workforce. Housing was very difficult to find and afford, and a lot of people were unemployed and needing assistance. So it was a very severe time in deep recession, and housing was still unaffordable for some. And 3 weeks later, the Housing Authority was created and had our first meeting in this environment. Next slide, please. Fast forward to 1991, 20 years later, Boeing was back. They wanted to expand in Everett. They came to Everett and wanted to expand their workforce and put in a new airplane line. And guess what? The people in Snohomish County were cool to it. They didn't really want it. Many Snohomish County residents feared Boeing coming up and expanding their workforce in Everett because it was going to make traffic bad. But as part of the push to get jobs in Everett, Boeing contributed $25,000 to an advocacy campaign to run a housing levy similar to the one they've had in Seattle since 1986 to provide funding for affordable housing. This is a newspaper article, a printout of September 1991. The housing levy was ran and it failed miserably, even though there was no organized opposition. It failed by 60%. 80% voted no, only 20% voted yes. One of the quotes in the article was that it wasn't for lack of compassion, but fear of higher taxes that played a role in this election defeat. And in my view, personally, that's the definition of lack of compassion. This housing levy would have only raised property taxes less than $3 a month on an average priced house. And an average priced house in 1991 was listed as $100,000. So yes, it does involve a little higher taxes, but we failed an opportunity to do something about affordable housing then, and we still haven't done anything, and its problem's only getting worse. Next slide, please. Affordable housing is in decline, and that graph is certainly played out by the information Chris showed. Street homeless and crime are a visible portion of a much deeper crisis. The deeper crisis is affordability crisis. And we have to understand that the affordability crisis is also a crisis of prosperity. People are coming here in search of housing and in search of jobs. And there's a lot of high-paying jobs here, and that's creating an affordability crisis for not only for those that live here, but for people that are coming here too. Affordability is squarely affecting the middle class, as Chris's data showed, and it's becoming worse. Income inequality right now is a bigger problem than it ever has been. I read somewhere where it was a bigger problem, the biggest that's ever been since the French Revolution. So it's quite a problem. And if you could believe, New York City is a very expensive city, a very large city, 8 million people. Each month in New York City, 25% of the people, 2 million people, pass the majority of their income to their landlords in the form of rent. And everybody not a lot of people would be shocked by that, because we all know New York City is an expensive city. The same thing happens in Snohomish County. Snohomish County is a county of about 830,000 people. In the HART report that the county put out last year, they identified 100,000 families as low-income families. Average family size is 2.2. That's 220,000 people passing the majority of their income to the other 830,000 in the form of rent. It's just on a smaller scale, but it's the same problem that we're having. Next slide, please. The real problem is this: the average rent from 2010 to 2019 has gone up 49%, where the median household income has only gone up 7%. And that's the real problem. The pie chart to the right shows the estimated unmet need. This is for subsidized housing or for assistance. The blue column is the amount of assistance my organization provides. The green little slice of the pie is the amount of subsidy that Everett Housing Authority provides. Our two agencies combined meet about 15% of the need. So 85% of the people that need assistance for housing are not getting it. And that's a real crisis. And to back that up with other data, an interesting fact to understand is that 1/3 of all the children enrolled in public schools in this county get free and reduced lunch at school. That means they come from low-income families who can't even afford to feed their children for lunch. So certainly they need help paying their rent as well. Next slide, please. The last slide I want to leave you with is these two numbers. The 2,633 is the median price mortgage payment for somebody who purchased a median price house in Snohomish County, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, includes an estimate of property taxes and insurance, whereas the fair market rent for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house or apartment in Snohomish County is $2,694. Costs more to rent a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house or apartment in the county than it does to pay a mortgage payment. And that's the real crisis situation, because if you're paying that much in rent, how will you ever save up enough money for a down payment assistance? And the point of all this is that no matter what the economic cycle we're in, no matter what the economy is doing, there's going to be that segment of the population that needs some assistance for housing. If you're in the bottom 20% of anything, you're failing. If you're in the bottom 20% in school, you're probably failing. If you're in the bottom 20% of the economic cycle, you are struggling in this market. Last slide, please. Oh, well, this is just my organization, Housing Authority of Snohomish County. To learn more about us, I didn't want to get into us, but go to our website and see all the pictures of what we're doing. and I'll describe what we're doing. Thank you very much for your time. Look forward to the questions.
You're up, Kristen. Or Mayor Smith, excuse me.
That's okay. It's me and Kristen together. All right, perfect. I'm unmuted, right?
Yes.
You're
Coming through
unmuted.
great.
Can we see the screen?
Yeah, see the screen. Look at that beautiful city. Well, thank you so much for inviting Linwood to share what we've been working on to address our housing affordability. I'm really excited to talk about the development that's occurring in the city and our housing action plan, and hoping that many of you can get some tidbits for some of your programs from what I want to share with you today. I wanted to start today by sharing a little bit about what's happening in Linwood right now. A lot of the development we're seeing is due to planning efforts that we put in place in the early 2020s. Planning matters. It takes time to implement your planning, but so do market conditions. Linwood's single-family residential areas are mostly built out. So a lot of the development that we're seeing in our city center is in our city center and near Alderwood Mall. These areas are where there will also be Sound Transit light rail stations. Since January 2018, we have approved construction permits for more than 1,500 residential units. Over 1,000 of those are under construction right now. All of the construction that's currently happening was anticipated. However, we still need more housing. Specifically, we need housing options to meet the variety of needs in our community. And Chris and Dwayne have already addressed that. In May, the city adopted our housing action plan. This plan is a policy document that creates a menu of options for the city to promote housing that is safe and affordable for all of our community. The housing action plan addresses housing costs for every segment of the market. It's not just low income housing plans. In Linwood, when we talk about affordability, we use the federal definition of housing that is affordable at 30% of a household's income. Our housing action plan builds on a lot of work we had already started. I already mentioned planning efforts around Sound Transit and City Center. In addition, in 2019, I co-chaired with Executive Summers the Snohomish County Housing Affordability Regional Task Force, fondly called HART. HART released a report with immediate early action items and actions to complete over the next 5 years. I was really proud and happy that Linwood had already completed all of the early action items and about half of the 5-year items before the report was even released. In fact, one of the early action items we completed in the 1990s, we're one of only a few cities to have an interlocal agreement with Pasco, wave Dwayne, which allows them to operate in our city without needing additional approvals for every site. We also have already streamlined our permitting and environmental review processes and implemented a multifamily tax exemption program to incentivize development at 80% of the area median income, which is a very hard project to develop and finance. Despite our previous efforts, Linwood still has a problem. Traditionally, we have been known as the city where working families can afford to purchase a home. Unfortunately, it's just not the case anymore. Like the rest of the region, housing prices have risen drastically. Over the past decade, in Linwood, housing costs have increased 20 to 40%, while wages have slightly decreased when accounting for inflation. High housing costs are a major concern. We need housing options that are safe and affordable in order to have a solid economy and vibrant community. Studies show that children who lack stable housing do worse at school and are less healthy. After all, housing is health. We also heard repeatedly from our business community that high housing costs make it especially difficult to recruit and retain employees. The city spent just over 1 year to develop the Housing Action Plan. The plan built on existing efforts, but also included a lot of new research and analysis. Community engagement was a major component of the project. We wanted to make sure that we heard from a diverse group of community members, including residents, businesses, housing developers, and service providers. Our city staff created an engagement plan, and then guess what happened? 2 weeks later, COVID closed everything down. So our city has done this outreach all through COVID and actually done a spectacular job. But, and they found all sorts of ways to gather community feedback. There were 3 main rounds of engagement with lots of other efforts woven in. City staff created online videos, asked kids at summer camp to help envision Linwood's future, and distributed flyers at the library, collected surveys online and at the food banks. And our city council gathered a community group together to inform them on the perceived needs. All of our outreach was in English, Spanish, and Korean. During the last round of surveys, we collected over 700 responses, and the demographics of the respondents roughly matched the demographics of our city. Based on community input and an assessment of our housing needs, the city developed 4 goals for the Housing Action Plan. First, to produce housing that meets the needs of the, too fast, Kristen. First, to produce housing that meets the needs of the community. The second is to preserve existing housing that's affordable and safe so that people can stay in Linwood. The third goal is to partner with housing educators, providers, and other groups to find equitable housing solutions and remove systemic barriers. We know that housing is a regional challenge, and we're relying on partnerships to help address this challenge. And fourth is to prepare for continued growth and increase the quality of life in Linwood. We know growth is happening and will continue to happen, and Linwood's choosing to proactively prepare and choose how our city grows instead of waiting to respond. There are 10 strategies to help implement the goals. If you've driven on I-5 or visited the Alderwood Mall, you may have noticed that Linwood has a lot of construction cranes going up lately. I think at the height we've had about 7. Only one of them has lights on them though. That's Skanska at the Sound Transit light rail station. And speaking of stations, we have the one Sound Transit light rail station that'll be the terminus station in 2024, serving probably about 20,000 people stepping on and off of that daily. But Linwood's not done with light rail. Light rail will be crashing through our city and city center and putting another station near the Alderwood Mall, hopefully within the next 20 years or so. A lot of our strategies aim to leverage these transportation investments to build housing near them. We also recognize that light rail may not benefit everyone equally, so we've included measures such as a rental registry program to help with some of the negative impacts. The Housing Action Plan is a policy document. We have a lot of work ahead to figure out the details and implement it. In 2024, the county and every city in Snohomish County will be updating our comprehensive plans. Comprehensive plans are long-range planning documents that guide growth for the next 20 years. Now is the time to start providing input for what you want to see in the county and your cities. In Linwood, we're also updating development regulation and design guidelines to be more flexible and adaptive to changing conditions. So if you have ideas, we want to hear them. So thank you again for inviting me to present what's happening in Linwood. And it is my very, very special honor to introduce Mayor Cassie Franklin, who has also done outstanding efforts in Everett. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Smith, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all this morning on this important topic of housing. It's great to see all of that good development happening in Linwood, and sad to hear some of the data from Chris and Dwayne. But I think, as we've heard from everybody, we need more housing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that for Everett. You know, one of my goals is that everyone who lives and works and goes to school in Everett can afford to live here, and that we have a variety of housing options, from apartments, townhomes, single-family homes, duplexes, in all our city neighborhoods. Everett is expected to grow to a population of 165,000 by 2035. To accommodate this growth, we will need to add close to 23,000 new units of housing, which is about 1,500 units each year. So good news first. We've been moving ahead with some really great housing developments. Waterfront Place welcomed its first residents last month. The Scott Dolls Marquee Apartments are nearing completion and will add 77 units downtown. And construction is moving ahead with a large development in Central Everett with Devco project, which will add 430 units of affordable housing. And there are dozens of smaller projects throughout the city, including a number of accessory dwelling units. This is good. But in spite of these great projects, sadly, we're nowhere near where we need to be. Housing production levels simply have not kept pace with growth. And additionally, housing costs have grown exponentially this last year. If Everett is going to remain affordable for our current residents and attract new residents and the workforce we need more housing at all price points. And we also need a range of temporary and permanent housing options for people experiencing homelessness. You know, we had a shortage of shelter even before the pandemic, and the need has only increased. And what's truly heartbreaking is the growing number of homeless school children, that Chris and Dwayne mentioned, which is unacceptable. This is a challenge that we as a community need to solve. Part of the challenge we face in creating housing is resistance from the community, and in particular from those who already have a home. The folks who typically come and reach out to electeds or planning commissions about housing issues, well, they tend to be homeowners, and they tend not to want things to change. I get it. Most of us purchase homes or choose a neighborhood in which we rent because we like the way the neighborhood feels. Change is difficult and change is hard, but in order to grow as a community, we all need to embrace the changes that come with growth. You know, I loved seeing that little note from the children in Linwood about what their vision for Linwood's future. They weren't concerned about the growth, they were celebrating it. Growth is necessary. Not only are folks from other areas moving to the beautiful Northwest, but our children and grandchildren also want and deserve to be able to live and work and find an affordable first home. I feel like some of us have forgotten or perhaps never experienced what it's like to not be able to afford a home or even a rental. That is what our children and grandchildren are experiencing as they look for homes and rentals today. The only way to solve this ever-growing crisis is to build more housing. And too often, one of the biggest barriers to this is the pushback we receive every time a development, multiplex, duplex, or even an ADU is being built. As a mayor, I often hear, we already have too much density. What about parking? We have too much affordable housing in this neighborhood, or affordable housing will increase crime. I hear this type of project shouldn't go in a single-family neighborhood. It will decrease our home values. Maybe it will block our views. Or I hear it's an industrial neighborhood and housing shouldn't go here either. Often I just hear this type of housing just doesn't fit. Elected officials need to hear from others who will be affected by the decisions we make or don't make regarding housing. From real estate developers, home builders, banks, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, families in need of housing, or simply individuals that might remember what it's like to choose between food, healthcare, and rent, because you can't afford all three. By building more housing, we will solve problems for a broad spectrum of individuals, those who are currently being priced out of the market in which they live, and families that simply can't find adequate supply of available housing and are forced to endure ridiculously long commutes in order to get to their jobs. So you can help. One way to help right now in Everett is by providing feedback on our draft housing action plan, which was just released. The plan represents a milestone in our Rethink Housing initiative as it is the culmination of a robust multi-year community-wide effort to identify the housing needs of our current and future Everett residents and outline strategies on how we can address those needs. It includes a set of recommended housing policies, regulations, and incentive-based actions intended to support housing development in the city. The focus is on a variety of housing types in all neighborhoods, strong transit-oriented development, and supportive community housing options as we grow. The plan proposes ways we can increase housing variety by promoting ADUs, updating city codes, and updating our design guidelines to ensure new developments align with the character of the neighborhoods as we grow. It also has recommendations on how we can encourage new growth in our urban corridors. And it looks at ways we can build more transit-oriented communities so that we have more walkable, bikeable, livable communities throughout our city. The draft plan addresses affordability and explores ways we can bring housing into financial reach for more people who want to live in Everett and be able to afford to keep living in Everett. This could take the form of tenant protections, financial assistance to low-income renters or homeowners, and incentives to the development of affordable housing. The plan's open for public comment through July, and we'll have additional public opportunities to learn and engage in it, but I encourage you to take a look at the plan that's available on our website and weigh in. Lastly, I just want to share a couple updates on what we're doing in Everett to address homelessness. Homelessness is an issue that we are struggling with across the country, and it's only gotten worse in the pandemic. To help those struggling this last year, we worked with partners and administered CARES Act funding for rental assistance and housing stability. And the very beginning of July, we are on target to open our new pallet shelter pilot project, which will provide temporary shelter for up to 30 people experiencing homelessness. We're pretty optimistic about this program and that it will serve as a model that can be replicated throughout the region. In addition to pallet shelter, we continue to work closely with partner organizations who are the experts in providing services to help those experiencing homelessness. Earlier this year, we kicked off our homeless student task force to identify ways we can address the rapid increase in unsheltered families and children in our region. The task force is going to provide recommendations on how we will achieve better outcomes for our homeless students, and I look forward to receiving their full report very shortly. I'd like to close by saying once again, our housing supply and affordability challenges cannot be solved without creating more housing, and we need all kinds of housing at a range of price points. As a city, we're doing what we can to improve zoning, development regulations, and our building codes with the hopes to incentivize development. But we need more community and business support behind this work, and we also need state and local leaders to make housing supply a priority across the region. Thank you, and I look forward to joining my fellow panelists as we answer some questions for you all.
All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Cassie and Mayor Nicola and others. This was just great insight, information, sobering for some, I'm sure. But let's dive into some Q&A while we have time. First and foremost, let's talk about housing affordability. So Chris presented data that outlines income is not meeting requirements to housing. How do we address this affordability issue? We'll start off with Dwayne.
Well, I think one of the ways that we have to understand that we have to address this affordability issue is that we need more housing subsidy. You know, I've seen some of the comments in the chat box that there's some affordable apartments here that are empty and some that are not. The fact of the matter is a lot of the people that we serve need subsidy, and there's a total lack of subsidy available for low-income people, and that's the driving factor. A lot of the properties and the projects that have been built lately use tax credits, and they're required to charge, or they're limited to charge rents affordable to 60% of AMI, which is the area median income. And the 60% of AMI rent is still way too much money for a lot of people, and that's what we have to understand. We administer a Section 8 voucher program, which is a HUD subsidy program. And the average income on our Section 8 program is $16,800 per year. That's $1,400 a month is the average income for somebody on our Section 8 program. And 70% of the people on the program are elderly or have a disabled family member as part of their family. So I think, you know, a lot of these units are built at 60% of AMI or whatever, but we need units that are affordable for people at 30% or less of AMI. There's just not a lot of those units, or we need subsidy. So
thanks, Dwayne. I want to add a little bit to that affordability issue. I think one of the things that we need to do is continue to look for opportunities for a wider range of housing options. When I think about Everett, owning a home is out of reach for almost everybody that's looking to own a home right now. And I heard this from Mayor Smith too, our single family neighborhoods are built out. And so what we need to look at is, as we are updating our codes or things that are in our housing action plan, are adding ADUs, adding duplexes, lifting some of the restrictions that have been in place that have completely restricted development in some of these areas for years, and creating those opportunities for families. I, for example, am personally building, I'm hiring somebody to build an ADU at my home, and that ADU can be used for my mother-in-law. It could be used for my daughter when she is now getting to the age where she might go to college, but she won't be able to afford a home. And so all of us can look for ways to increase housing inventory and supply throughout our communities. That increases affordability as well, beyond multifamily affordable housing developments.
If I might, I'd like to also give a shout out to our local education centers and workforce training programs. We have some really great groups that are helping to forecast and train or retrain workers for jobs that are in high demand and pay good wages. And if I might, as a member of the Sound Transit Board and a retiree of Edmonds College, I heard a need from Sound Transit where they need 50 million more hours of construction work to get ST3 done. And they want diversity. So I went to President Singh, who's with us today, and I said, is there any way you can do an apprentice program for Sound Transit? And especially with COVID and a lot of people lost their jobs in my cities, let's scoop them up and let's get them recertified and get them a paying apprenticeship job so that they really can live and work in Linwood. President Singh has accommodated this, and they're going to start recruiting for a program in summer, and the apprentice, the first cohort will start in fall quarter. So spread the word about that. And you, as business owners, if you see an employment group that needs training to serve in our community and in the county, go talk to your local GEM community college, because they are agile and they are ready to serve and work on this work on the workforce. So thank you for that. Appreciate you, President Singh.
All right, thanks. Great answers here so far. And I want to ask an additional question, but I think I might go to chat first for that question, just to keep it honest. All right, Alyssa Jackson, who I know, mentioned how do ADUs factor into this conversation, specifically the proposed changes for ADUs at the county level? Who would like to dive in on that question?
Well, I think ADUs have potential to help. Currently, there are not that many, and they are currently hard to construct. So the impact so far has been small, but the fact remains we need housing of all types and all shapes and forms. And so anything that will promote additional housing units is good. But with ADUs in particular, we're just starting out.
All right, let's move on with another question. What is the plan to accommodate the expected growth under the PSRC growth management projections? And then there's an additional question there I want to dive in. Mayor Franklin, this is specific to you as well. Can you address how will new military growth be accommodated in housing demand? So.
Well, I think everything we've been talking about is how we're trying to reach those growth targets under the PSRC growth management projections. But we are, as we've shared, very far behind. We're not building enough to reach those requirements. You know, we've changed our zoning. We had the Metro Everett plan, which can accommodate quite a bit of growth here in Everett, but we're not seeing the level of development necessary that we would meet those projections. Specifically to military families, you know, I'm thrilled to see the growth of Naval Station Everett. I met with Captain Davis and the new admiral, the regional commander. just last week, and I asked them about housing and what the Navy was thinking it to accommodate that growth. I know they'll be looking at expanding opportunities in Marysville, where the commissary is, and potentially on the base, and see to address the sailors' needs. But the sailors are competing with the rest of us for housing. So everything we're doing to develop affordable housing here in Everett and throughout the county will also benefit our military families who are serving not only this community, but our country, and help them afford housing if they choose off-base housing options. So I think looking at our housing action plans, making progress on all those recommendations is one way that we can inch towards reaching those projections and accommodating all the families, including our military families.
All right, Dwayne, looks like you were going to chime in.
Well, I would just chime in. I agree completely with Mayor Franklin. I mean, this is part of the process we've been going through. The price of land in our area and the restrictions of the land we have available to us makes it completely impossible to build single family homes at an affordable price. We have to embrace more density. We have to embrace more housing types in order to accommodate growth. That's just the bottom line. I know people don't want to hear it. I've been to a lot of different city council meetings where there's recalcitrant council members that just get a lot of pushback from their constituents, their single family homeowners constituents. And we just need to start embracing more housing density, more housing types to accommodate the growth that is coming.
Yeah.
Also, sorry, I also just want to jump in and add, I can't tell you how often I hear, well, don't build it and they won't come. And that's not true. There is no way to avoid growth. And the best way that you can articulate that is to think about, do you have children or grandchildren? And are they going to live with you until you die? Or will they someday want their own home?
Yeah.
That people might be able to understand. But in addition to that, companies grow and need a workforce, and that workforce needs to live close to work in order to save all of us on the sprawl and the damage that does to the environment and our roads and everything else. Growth is inevitable. And so I think, as Dwayne said, embracing that growth, very much like the children in Linwood in their drawings, and envisioning a community that can have that diversity of housing everywhere is where we should be working towards as a community.
Well, and if I can offer, we need to jump in now because we're all, as I said, working on our comprehensive plans. And that's where you start the plan. Remember, I said planning matters. And fun fact, based on some of our preliminary data in Linwood, we estimate that we're going to need about 10,000 more housing units for our growth. So we don't want 10,000 moving in and living on the streets. We need to start planning now so that people have somewhere to live. So I'm happy that we have a beginning foundation and vision to accommodate that. But it's hard work to do it. And it's, as you've been hearing, it's hard work to get everybody on board with all the different opportunities that we have for development, but it's important. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I want to move on to get a little bit more of our questions answered here. One component to this, some of the conversations that we've had have been centered around projects and programs, but what are some of the impacts of housing costs for developers? And also, are there other pain points or barriers that you're seeing that create this housing environment we're in?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the lack of available land is definitely a factor, and the cost of the land is definitely a factor. If you have to pay $300,000 or $400,000 for a lot, and then build, spend another $300,000 or $400,000 for a house and sell it, you have to sell it for $1 million to make any money. That's not affordable. Period. I mean, the housing market is broken. The median price house is $560,000 or something like that. It's impossible to make that affordable. There are other things too, as far as parking requirements and zoning and all that kind of stuff that can reduce a lot of regulatory fees and everything like that, that do make it more expensive. But the main thing is the cost of land.
Yeah, and the cost of, supplies, the cost of land, the lack of available land in Everett, it's redevelopment, which is even more expensive. But it's labor, materials, all of that. But I think there's also condo liability issues. We haven't seen condo construction for years. And so in Everett, the majority of our housing is rentals. It's really hard in Everett to be a homeowner because most of the housing available is a rental unit. And so there hasn't been enough construction of new condos because of the condo liability issues that I know some of them have been addressed, but I think there's still a lot of concern in the community. And when we talk about the cost of housing construction and land and all of that, think about affordable housing developers. Not only do they are they competing with the for-profit developers, and they're not going to be making money off of these developments. They're really just trying to serve the community. So we have to find new ways to support affordable housing developers as they're looking to acquire land, and that could be through city gifting a property to affordable housing developers so that they can provide necessary housing in our communities.
All right. Well, I have an additional question then. So first, I'll say really quickly, anecdotally, obviously some of you know that I have a memoir out there, and I talk a little bit about my experience coming from public housing and homelessness. And so some of the questions that I've heard around the county are centered around the silos of housing and how we've separated those. And Mayor Franklin, you've mentioned briefly that we need housing for all, but can you all talk a little bit about the removal of these housing silos? Is there an opportunity to merge some of these income levels on housing projects?
Well, I'll just say that I think that a development that has the diversity of housing options within that development, a community that can house a CEO to a barista, to a low-income family, to a high-income family that's an executive level, is a healthier community. Those schools are healthier, the children grow up with better outcomes. There's been a lot of research and data that mixed income level communities are very healthy, and it builds a stronger, resilient community. So I absolutely believe that housing silos should go away, and that we should work to diversify each of our communities to increase the health and well-being, and to ensure that not only our CEOs have a place to live, but those that are filling our gas tanks and fixing our water heaters also have a place to live in our communities.
I'm wondering, Dwayne, if you want to talk about our project in Linwood and how it's so hard to pencil out for a full project that's just low-income housing, and how doing blended market rate and low-income housing is really the only way that you're going to be able to figure out how to build it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just with the cost of development and construction, it makes it very difficult to just charge rents at a certain rent level without some form of subsidy. And, we've had issues, I want to thank Mayor Franklin and Mayor Smith, because these two mayors are two of the most supportive in this county when it comes to affordable housing. And in addition, when I was participating in that Housing Affordability Regional Task Force as well. But the problem we're having is a lot of NIMBYism and lack of leadership at local political levels, which has to be challenged. I mean, and then as far as the frustration in working with councils is, as was said before, they hear from single family homeowners who do not want this kind of housing next to them. There's a tremendous fear when it comes to affordable housing of who's going to be living next to me. And in many cases, it's completely unfounded, because my son and my daughter are low income and they're starting out their careers. And I would love it if they could live next to me, but they can't afford to. And that's who we're talking about serving. We're talking about serving our children and our elderly parents. I mean, that's who's living in affordable housing. And even in front of the City Council of Linwood, the citizens that came in and spoke out against a rezone effort I was involved in, just said kind of the things that just came off the top of their head, which the majority of were completely unfounded and wrong. But this is who the council listens to, and it's very difficult to then try to go through a public process and build housing. So
Yeah, I think that's a good comment there. And I want to just highlight before we go to Rick, who has his hand raised. I know for a fact that the people that are living in these affordable housing places are your potential CEO of EASC, or it's your potential mayor of Everett or Linwood, or maybe the president of the United States is in this affordable housing place, or it's even Howard Schultz, who is the Starbucks CEO. So I think we have to tell the story better when we're talking about what affordable housing is. And I think, as Cassie mentioned, and I pushed you all a little bit in that direction, it is workforce housing. And so we have to merge that to say, as some of you have already said, that's that CEO level all the way down to the person who actually we really need. And we found out we needed them during this pandemic, which is the food service workers or the police officers, or the list goes on and on. So I just wanted to phrase that for you all to say, I know what it's like to be out with nothing or no place to go. And it's nothing that I would do to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to not feel that feeling, to know where that next meal is coming from, but also knowing that you have a warm place to stay. And I think we know that that is paramount for us to have this successful county and community that we want. So without further ado, Rick, go ahead. Katie's going to unmute you. I've set you up. So here we go.
Thanks. I just wanted to make an observation. I think the focus on land cost is right. And I want to observe that even though there's a lot of intrigue around the future of Sound Transit's light rail program in the Everett corridor, there's going to be a lot of debate about when that project's going to be delivered and in what order. It's really important for this group to know and focus on the fact that the planning for those stations is going to unfold over the next 2 to 3 years. And, you know, the Sound Transit program, in addition to being an infrastructure investment, is a massive land acquisition program. And they are going to be looking at stations at every major node up the I-5 corridor and, you know, a 40 to 50 acre maintenance facility somewhere in the vicinity of 128. If history repeats itself, if you look at what they did in Bellevue, they will be, and even in Seattle, they will be making significant amounts of property available for low income and affordable housing. So I think it's really important that these two threads of housing and transit be tracked and planned and strategized by this group jointly. And it may be worth, you know, sending a group to go meet with Sound Transit to look at some of the case studies that exist of, you know, delivered housing in King County and on the east side in particular. They went through a really difficult transition over the last several years of embracing this idea of making TOD available, making it available for affordable housing. That was a big change for them. But whether the Everett project is delivered in 2035 or 2040 or some other point, the planning for those stations is going to happen in the next few years. And that's where we have the most influence over land use. So I'd make that observation just for the consideration of the group.
Thank you, Rick. And now is the time for us to kind of have some closing remarks. And so in having those closing remarks, though, I'd love for you all to highlight the potential opportunity, if there is one, for county communities to collaborate on developing investment dollars and incentives. So I'll just leave that there. And we're going to start with Mayor Smith first, and we'll go to Dwayne and then Mayor Franklin. If you would wrap up, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary, and thank you everyone for attending today. I just want to make an umbrella statement, and then I want to have Kristen, our senior planner at our city, who has been the lead on all of this housing, to talk just a few seconds about our collaborative efforts and why those are so important. Another fun fact, and it's not fun at all, but in Linwood, at least 2 in every 5 households are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And as Cassie already mentioned, that means they're making trade-offs for food, childcare, healthcare, transportation. And it's pervasive in our region. And if you aren't personally experiencing it, chances are there's several people who you know that are. So in order to meet the needs of our neighbors and community, we need more housing. Go to your city council meetings, write to elected officials and city staff, let them know that you support more housing options. And Kristen, if you wouldn't mind, just a few words on our collaborations, because that might stir some ideas in people.
Great, thanks everyone. Yeah, I think collaboration is the key here. This is not a Linwood problem, it's not an Everett problem, it is a regional problem, and we're going to have to work together to solve this. Hearing from community members, not just when they're upset, but when they're excited and when they see solutions, is really important for staff and for the council and the electeds to hear that as well. And then there's been a lot of talk about Sound Transit and this investment. There's also a really unique opportunity to pair that housing and look at what transit-oriented development looks like. And so we're working with Everett and the county and other cities to all look at what growth in those areas looks like, because it'll be really different and unique from, say, the satellite areas like Marysville or Arlington. And so we're working together to look at what transit-oriented development communities can look like in a way that has just growth for everyone. And so we're excited to be part of that with Everett and other cities. And we hope that you all provide input to us. We are happy to hear from you and want to work with you on finding these solutions.
I'd just like to say, there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration and everything like that, and that's great. But one of the things that nobody's talked about yet, and what needs to be talked about and what needs to be elevated, is the fact that we need money to do all of this. During the HART committee process, getting all the mayors and participants together, there were 30 different proposals on financing different things, and only 3 had anything to do with raising revenue. And they were ranked by all the participants as number 28, number 29, and number 30 out of 30. We can't do this without money. I like Mr. Elgin Fritz's comment about planning around TOD stations. We're already doing that. I'm on a nonprofit board in Seattle that has won 2 RFPs from Sound Transit. Even with a deep discount on the cost of land, those projects are still costing in excess of $100 million to execute. And without some commitment of resources from the county, it's not going to happen. People have to get over the idea that a tax increase for housing is undoable, and we have to get more resources in this county, period.
Yeah, you just said the dirty word, Dwayne, revenue. And, as I talk to people that are running for office, the great way to lose your next election is to talk about the importance for revenue and raising taxes, or to talk about housing, because people don't want to see new housing developments. It is really, so I think, Gary, you hit the nail on the head when you said we've got to tell our story better. There is so much fear of things that people absolutely shouldn't fear. They need to recognize that these diverse, economically diverse neighborhoods are healthy neighborhoods, that people that work in your city deserve to live in your city. And you think that maybe we do have an opportunity after 2020 and who we suddenly deemed as essential workers that, they probably weren't on our radar before. People who work in your grocery store, your cashiers, your folks that are serving your meals. they can't afford to live in our cities anymore, and they can't all commute from Darrington. So we really do have to do more. I think that is where we collaborate. We collaborate on that messaging. We collaborate on the strategies that were developed in the HEART plan and our, whether it's cities like Everett and Linwood modeling kind of our housing action plans and helping other communities develop their own housing action plans. But I think those are the ways that we can tackle this. And truly, we need to build more housing. So Gary, and everybody here at Economic Alliance, I really appreciate the focus here on housing. It's been a long time coming that the business community has put a strong focus on housing, and I very much appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Well, folks, that is an amazing conversation we just had. I want to thank Mayor Franklin, Mayor Smith, Dwayne, Chris, and others who spoke as well. Kristen, I can't see you on my screen, but I know you're there. So I want to thank you all for that. Really, really important conversation to have, but I want you all to remember one final thing as we leave and depart. Housing is a human right. And that means that in order for us to reach this quality of life that we want in Snohomish County, we have to provide that to every single person possible. And that means workforce housing is for everyone. So I want to thank you all for speaking up, being stewards of this work. And it looks like the group wants us to come back again for an encore. So we're going to stay on for one more hour. I'm just kidding. We're going to schedule another housing event and continue to have this conversation. But looking forward really quickly, June 22nd at 8:30 a.m., Be There, Be Square, Long-Term Care Act, and your business. So looping this all together, we need all of these components, but housing is definitely seminal as well. So thank you all. Have a great day, and think housing, think community, think Snohomish County. See you guys.